Hi, everybody. Welcome to Christian Homestead. My name is Jared. I have some more thoughts about the passing of President Holland. In fact, I think I have 2 videos worth. So we're going to do this one, and then I have another one that'll come after this at some point. There are a lot of things to think about. So much so that it's been a while since I've done this, but I created a playlist. This will probably just be a temporary playlist about the passing of President Holland and all the things that we're observing. If you haven't seen these previous videos, you may want to go watch those after this. You don't have to do it in order, but I really wouldn't miss those other videos if this is the first one that you're watching. Okay, so I've added on to this. So look at this. Okay, this is my spreadsheet called Timeline Second Coming. Okay, I already had this on here. President Jeffrey R. Holland passes away the 27th of the month, like President Nelson. You'll remember that President Nelson passed away on the 27th of September. But back to President Holland. He died on the 7th of Tevet, which anytime there's a 7, including 27, I take note of that. And especially in the case of Tevet, it's one of the months on the Hebrew calendar. It's associated with the tribe of Dan. I have a whole theory about that, or an idea that I'm entertaining, but he passed away on the 7th of Tevet, and it was also Saturday, so it was Jewish Sabbath. Now, here's something new that I've added. He died in the same month that he was born. He was born December 3rd, 1940. So he passed away on the 27th of December. He was born on the 3rd of December. And guess who else follows this pattern? President Nelson. If we go down to President Nelson, let me read what I have for him. So he passed away on the 27th of the month, like President Holland, at the age of 101, 7 days before General Conference. He served as president of the church for 7.7 years, or 2,813 days. And when you break it up, he served as president of the church for 7 years, 7 months, 7 weeks, and 7 days. I have another spreadsheet that shows that. And then here's the new part that I added. Died in the same month that he was born. He was born September 9th, 1924. And he passed away September 27th, 2025. So that's really interesting. That 2 of them, they died exactly 3 months apart. They died in the same month that they were born. You have these 7s that seem to go along with their time of service or when they passed away. And this whole thing with them dying exactly 3 months apart, it reminds me of what President Nelson said in the April 2024 General Conference. He started out his talk by saying, "My dear brothers and sisters, today is an historic day for President Dallin H. Oaks and me. It was 40 years ago on April 7th, and of course it was April 7th, 1984, when we were sustained to the quorum of the 12 apostles." Then he has a footnote number 1. And that says, "I filled the vacancy in the quorum of the 12 left by the January 11th, 1983 death of Elder LeGrand Richards. Elder Oaks filled that which was left by the January 11th, 1984 death of Mark E. Peterson." So back then, you had those 2 apostles who died, in that case, exactly a year apart on the same day. And now, with President Nelson and President Holland, exactly 3 months apart on the same day. There were unusual circumstances with these 2 deaths back in 1983 and 1984. President Kimball was ill. He did not fill those vacancies because he was not with it mentally. And so, if I remember right, you had 2 general conferences that came and went without that first spot being filled. And then the next year comes around, and then you have another apostle that passes away. And it's not clear that President Kimball was going to be able to call 2 apostles. But in a moment of clarity and lucidity, he talked to President Hinckley and told him to call President Nelson and President Oaks in that order. Also, between those 2 deaths, there was a flooding in downtown Salt Lake. The flood of 1983. It was really dramatic. They had to divert the flow. It basically came all the way up to Temple Square. There's pictures of it. What's interesting, I'm just realizing now, is between the passing of President Nelson and President Holland, there was also flooding in downtown Salt Lake, or in Salt Lake City, during General Conference. Just do a search. I didn't think about that until just now. So flooding between these 2 dates, and then flooding between these 2 dates in 2025. It's very odd. And I don't think it's coincidence. I don't know exactly what it means, but I think it means something. I think at the very least we should pay attention. Okay, so in the previous videos, let's move to the next topic. In the previous videos, we've entertained the idea, and I've been entertaining the idea for a long time, that President Nelson, President Holland could be the 2 witnesses. I know what the scriptures say. I have them all collected on my spreadsheet right here. I have all the scriptures, starting with Isaiah, Zechariah, Revelation, 2nd Nephi, and then I also have as many quotes as I've been able to find. And I'm somebody that is flexible, and things may read a certain way. It's hard to tell sometimes what's very, very literal and what's symbolic. And so I understand that this may not seem to be what the scriptures say, but the Jews made the mistake of thinking that they had everything figured out. And so when Christ came, they didn't accept him because they thought they already knew exactly what was supposed to happen, what it was supposed to look like. I'm not going to make that mistake. All I know, like I've said in previous videos, is that President Holland has had some very interesting dealings with the Jews, and he met Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Him and President Nelson went to Jerusalem at the beginning of President Nelson's presidency. And there's more, okay? So let's just entertain the idea. You don't have to believe this. I don't necessarily believe this. But if there's one part of that prophecy that is literal, if literally they're going to be dead for 3.5 days and then be resurrected, well, that time has already passed for President Nelson. But what if it plays out that it's after the second witness passes away, then 3.5 days later, that's when he is resurrected? I don't know. But if that's the case, there's 2 ways that you can look at it here. The one way is you can look at, I'm recording this on Saturday. So today is Saturday, and then 3.5 days later, so like 1 full day, Sunday, and then Monday, and then Tuesday. That's 3 full days, and then half of the day on Wednesday, which happens to be New Year's Eve. But if you go strictly off of like 24-hour periods, it would be the 30th. The reason why is because he passed away at 3 a.m. It was actually 3:15 a.m. Mountain Time on Saturday. So you go from 3 a.m. to 3 a.m. Sunday, and then Monday, and then Tuesday. And then you add 12 hours, which would take you to 3:15 p.m. on Tuesday. So Tuesday, Wednesday, I don't know. I'm just putting it out there. It's just interesting to think about. I don't know if I believe that period of time is literal. The reason why is because of what it says in the New Testament student manual about the 2 witnesses. It says here, the angel told John that Jerusalem will be trodden underfoot 42 months. 42 months is the equivalent of 3.5 years. Likewise, the 2 witnesses mentioned in verse 3 would prophesy and testify of Christ for 1,260 days, or approximately 3.5 years. They would be slain, and their bodies would lie in the street for 3.5 days. In the scriptures, particularly in Revelation, the number 3.5 often describes a time or a limited period of tribulation during which evil forces are allowed to do their work. Since 3.5 is half of 7, which symbolizes perfection and completion, it may represent imperfection and apostasy. It may also suggest that God will not allow evil to go on unchecked. Evil's time is bounded and its limits are set. So I don't know. I'm just putting it out there just in case, just something to think about. I wouldn't change any of your plans other than if there's repenting that you need to do, you should always do that sooner than later and go through the necessary effort and work to do that. I tend to take this point of view right here. This is Victor Ludlow, Deseret News, August 26, 2010. Mideast Prophecies Wow, BYU audience. When will 2 prophets come to the Holy Land? It's already happening. It's a common reality to people in the Middle East, Ludlow said. Ludlow tells students at BYU Jerusalem that they are in the right place if they want to meet a general authority. The top place to meet one of the brethren is church headquarters. The second is Provo, specifically the Missionary Training Center. The third is in the Holy Land. There is something to be felt there, Ludlow said. They see them all the time. So I'm just keeping my mind open. I feel like the 2 witnesses could more have to do with the concept of these other rows that I have above this. So 2 or 3, as in the law of witnesses. 2 or 3, as in gathering, like wherever 2 or 3 are gathered, I'm in their midst. You also have this interesting quote by Joseph Smith that talked about faith in regards to 2 or 3. He says, faith cannot exist without a concentration of 2 or 3. So I don't know, but I'm just putting that out there. Now, couple more things I want to put on your radar. Let's start to talk about 11. I've noted before this point that President Nelson, there were numbers that seemed to be really special to him, sacred. One was the number 7, of course. We've seen that so many times with President Nelson, 7. But another one is 11. And in the last video that I did about President Holland's passing, we noted that the aurora that took place this year, that could be seen all across the United States, it happened on November 11th, or in other words, 11/11. And that day, the 11th and the 12th, the aurora straddled those 2 days, was the exact midpoint between the death dates of President Nelson and President Holland. This is what happened exactly in between their death dates. The aurora was seen across the United States, including here at the Temple Lot in Independence, Missouri. So that stuck out to me because, like I said, we've already talked about President Nelson and 11. I also want to point out that if something does happen on New Year's Eve, if this like 3.5 days thing, it applies in this situation, on the Hebrew calendar, that's going to be the 11th of the month of Tevet. So just something to think about. But let's go to this spreadsheet that I guess I'm probably going to keep it because it has some interesting numbers. It's not really too applicable now. There were a couple general conferences that I was really looking forward to based on these numbers. And some of these still do apply to right now. So President Nelson passed away in his 11th decade of life. So from the time that you're born until 9 years old, that's your first decade. And then from 10 to 19, that's your second decade. So he died at the age of 101. And so that's his 11th decade. We just talked about the fact that him and President Oaks filled the vacancies left by the deaths of the previous 2 apostles who died exactly 1 year apart on January 11th of 1983 and 1984. 111. Okay. Like whenever you have like this repetition of numbers, 111, 77, whatever, I feel like there's something to that. In the hashtag give thanks video message, I don't have the story pulled up, but you can look it up. Just look at do a search for Sherry Dew, prophecy around corners. Both her and President Nelson shared the fact that that message was divinely inspired. They pitched him the idea that it'd be a good idea for the prophet to speak during the pandemic. And he's like, oh yeah, that's a good idea. Let's think about it. And then the next day, he said, okay, last night I received very specific revelation about this message. And he said that he wanted it to be published, the video to be published at a certain time on a certain day, and even that it should be a certain length. And so the time that it was published was 11 a.m. Mountain Time. It was published on, of all days, November 11th, which, again, this right here happened on November 11th. And the length of the video was 11 minutes. Not 11 minutes exactly, but it was, a little bit past 11 minutes. It didn't reach 12 minutes, 11 minutes. Okay. Sister Nelson noted, and we're just going to read this, and thank you to Caitlin with Anticipating Christ's Return. She's the one that told me about this. If you go to Sister Nelson's book called The Heavens Are Open, published 2019, page 125, she talked about how they found out that President Nelson was going to become the next president of the church. I'm just going to read this last sentence. At 11:01 p.m., we were awakened by a phone call telling us of the passing of President Thomas S. Monson. We were stunned. I don't know. All I can say is that they took note of the time. And that's something that you could easily just be like, oh, who cares? It doesn't matter what time we find out. They took note of it. And beyond that, she published it in her book. The exact time, 11:01. I wouldn't be surprised if President Nelson has seen 11 as a special number. I feel like probably a lot of us have our special numbers, and the Lord, I think, speaks to us sometimes with numbers. And so I'm sure President Nelson, I know President Nelson thought it was significant that you had those two apostles that passed away on January 11th, 1 year apart. And so for him to find out he's going to be the next president of the church at 11:01, he probably made that connection. It probably had meaning to him. So, 11, I think I might have some other examples, but I'm not sure where I have them at. But I know I did a video one time talking about this concept. But yeah, this happened on November 11th, exactly between the death dates of President Nelson and President Holland. Very odd indeed. Now, got just one more thing. Well, one or two more things. I got this comment from Lori Frost. She says, Joseph Smith died on June 27th. I was like, oh, wow, that could be significant. And then there was another comment after I responded by Deanna Price. Gordon B. Hinckley died on January 27th. And then Crystal Blue said, Thomas S. Monson also January 27th. So I went and looked it up. I always double check everything, and thank you all for your comments. I'm glad that you pointed that out because I may not have realized it. Went to Wikipedia. It has this table of all the presidents of the church, and it has their death dates in this column right here. So President Nelson, September 27th. Thomas S. Monson, he was born 1927, but he did not die on the 27th. But yes, President Hinckley did January 27th, and then Joseph Smith, January 27th. So that could be significant. I decided to use Grok to figure out what are the chances that out of the 18 presidents of the church, that 3 of them would die on the 27th of the month, whichever month they died in. And here's the summary. Under the assumption of uniform random death days, seeing 3 out of 18 presidents die on the 27th is quite unlikely, on the order of 1 in 200 to 300 chance, or about 0.3 to 0.5% probability. And the thing about it, I wish that Grok could calculate this, but every president of the church is important and special, and they have their missions just like all the apostles. But there are some that stand out. Obviously, Joseph Smith stands out. He's the head of this dispensation. It was through him that all the ordinances of salvation and exaltation were revealed and restored. Um, President Hinckley really stands out because it was during his time that we had that first really big wave of temple announcements. It was under him that The Living Christ was published. The conference center was constructed. The Winter Olympics came to Salt Lake, which he said was a fulfillment of one of Brigham Young's prophecies. So I remember, when I was younger, when I was a teenager and President Hinckley was president of the church, there was the general feeling that, wow, there's something going on with President Hinckley. A lot of people that I talked to and myself were thinking about the second coming with everything that was going on. Well, and then I don't need to say much about President Nelson. He definitely, I mean, he outdid, not that it's a competition, but it was revealed to him by the Lord to announce even more temples, like way more. President Nelson was very, very focused on the second coming. And then all the things that we've talked about. So for these three, Joseph Smith, President Hinckley, President Nelson, to pass away on the 27th of that month that they died in, I don't know. It just seems very, very unlikely, both with what Grok said, and then on top of that, who they were as presidents of the church. I pulled up this page. Oh, where'd it go? I pulled up this page that has all the apostles. Let's see, Erastus, no. I checked every apostle. So we have Erastus Snow, May 27th is when he passed away. I don't know if there was anything like really that stood out about him. But then I was surprised to see James E. Talmage, July 27th, and at the age of 70. 70 is, it's related to 7. It's 7 times 10. Yeah, July, because that's when Joseph Smith died, right? Oh no, it's June 27th. Sorry. So he passed away on July 27th at the age of 70. James E. Talmage was huge. He wrote Jesus the Christ, which is on the church website. Under Gospel Library, go to Jesus Christ, and they have that. It's the only book that I'm aware of that was written in the temple. He lived in the Salt Lake Temple as he was writing that book. And there's more that he did. He was a big one. Let's see. Let's go down to the next one. Here we have Gordon B. Hinckley. And then we have N. Eldon Tanner. He died November 27th. Okay, here's President Nelson. Again, just pointing out again, he died in the same month that he was born. And then after that, we have President Holland, died the same month that he was born. It's also kind of interesting to note that he became an apostle in 1994. That's 10 years after President Nelson became an apostle. President Nelson and President Oaks, it was 1984. President Holland, 10 years later, 1994. It just feels like there's a big connection between President Holland and President Nelson. Okay, and then we have Joseph Smith right here. We already talked about him. But I didn't think about the fact that, his brother, Hiram Smith, was martyred on that same day. So here you have a coupling of Joseph Smith and Hiram Smith. And now in 2025, there's this pairing or coupling of President Nelson and President Holland dying on the 27th. So I don't know if this is some kind of like mirror thing going on. If it's like bookends, or I don't know, but it's really interesting. And then I think that's it for apostles. I did the same thing with Grok. Grok said, in short, under random chance, the odds are about 1.41%, or roughly 1 in 71. Quite rare, but within the realm of occasional coincidences in large historical data sets. So it may not stand out as much, but again, when we think about some of these key figures, Joseph and Hiram Smith, Gordon B. Hinckley, Russell M. Nelson, President Holland, and James E. Talmadge, the ones that died on the 27th, I feel like they really stand out. And then the last thing I wanted to show you, it's not huge, but I have a spreadsheet where I have all the apostles. And by this count, it's not just apostles that have only been in the Quorum of the 12, it's all apostles, from Joseph Smith all the way to Gerald Casse. So by that count, and I think that this is correct, Jeffrey R. Holland was the 99th. He was the 99th apostle. And then Henry B. Eyring, the 100th. So that could be significant. I'm not sure. There's kind of this idea with those numbers, like 99, you know, it suggests to the mind that everything is almost done. 99%. It's almost complete. With the number 11, I have a whole row for this on my spreadsheet called quotes A through Z, but for the number 11, you have the concept of the 11th hour, you know, the very last workers going out. It's the last, you know, the last hour of work, the 11th hour. So that's just another thing. He was the 99th apostle. In the upcoming video, I have something to say about the fact that he died at the age of 85. There is something really, really interesting about that, let me tell you. But that'll be, I don't know if it'll be the next video that I publish or the one after the next one, but I will be doing that video. It's interesting because even before President Holland passed away, I wanted to do something about the age 85 because it shows up in the scriptures, and I was developing this idea aside from this, and now it just became all the more interesting that President Holland died at 85. So I feel like something very, very special is going on right now. I don't know what it is. I don't know if it's just like moving into a new phase. I don't know if it has to do with the two witnesses. I don't know. But I feel like it is related to the second coming. I feel like it's all highly unusual. It does feel like it's a part of the Lord's patterns, and the Lord knows. So all we can do is just wait and see, but let's continue to watch and be ready. Okay, that's going to be it for this one. I'll talk to you guys later.